My teacher humiliated me in class. Years later, karma hit hard. The day I was broken in front of everyone. I was never the loud kid. I wasn't the troublemaker, the class clown, or the one teachers worried about. I was quiet, average, and invisible until the day my teacher decided to make me a lesson. It was my final year of school. I was around 15, already dealing with the awkwardness of adolescence, insecurity, and the pressure of exams that supposedly decided our future. School was supposed to be a safe place, or at least neutral. That illusion ended in one single class. Her name was Mrs. Carter. She was known as a strict but fair teacher. That's what adults said. Students, however, knew a different version: sharp tongue, favoritism, and a tendency to humiliate students she didn't like under the guise of discipline. That day, we had a surprise test. I hadn't done well. My paper wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. When she started handing back the graded papers, my stomach twisted. I already knew I hadn't passed. Then she stopped at my desk. She didn't just put the paper down. She held it up. "This," she said loudly, "is what happens when you're lazy." The class went silent. I felt every eye turn toward me. She read my score out loud. Then she laughed and shook her head. "Honestly," she continued, "students like you are why standards are dropping. No ambition, no discipline, no future." I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. Someone snickered. Then another. Soon, a few classmates were laughing, not because it was funny, but because laughter is contagious when someone else is being torn apart. I couldn't look up. My face burned. My hands were shaking. She wasn't done. "Do you know what you'll become if you keep this up?" she asked. Before I could answer, she did it for me. Nothing. That word hit harder than anything else. Nothing. She told me to stand up. I stood there, frozen, while she lectured the class about how not to end up like me. I was an example, a warning, a failure on display. When she finally told me to sit down, my ears were ringing. I don't remember the rest of the class. I don't remember the bell ringing. I don't remember walking out. What I do remember is going to the bathroom afterward and locking myself in a stall, so no one could see me cry. That humiliation didn't last 5 minutes. It lasted years. From that day on, I believed her words. That I was lazy. That I was stupid. That I had no future. Every time I failed, her voice echoed in my head. Nothing. I never told my parents. I never complained. I convinced myself that maybe she was right. But life has a strange way of circling back. And years later, when I least expected it, karma finally knocked on her door. The damage nobody saw. After that day, something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was subtle, quiet, slow, and destructive. I stopped raising my hand in class. Even when I knew the answer, I stayed silent. Every time I thought about speaking, I imagined Mrs. Carter's voice cutting me down again. I started sitting in the back, shrinking myself, hoping to disappear. My grades didn't improve. In fact, they got worse. Not because I didn't care, but because I believed there was no point. If a teacher, someone who was supposed to guide and encourage, thought I was nothing, then why should I try to prove otherwise? Teachers have power most of them never realize. Their words don't stay in the classroom. They follow students home. They echo at night. They become part of how a child sees themselves. I started avoiding school whenever I could. Fake stomach aches, silent mornings, walking through hallways with my head down. I felt like everyone remembered that moment, even though most of them probably forgot it within days. But I didn't. Years passed, and I carried that humiliation like a scar. Even after graduating, it followed me into adulthood. Every job interview, every opportunity, every risk I hesitated. What if I fail? What if she was right? I chose safe paths, small dreams, low expectations. I watched classmates go on to universities, careers, and confidence. I told myself they were different, smarter, better, not nothing. Inside, I was still that 15-year-old kid standing in front of the class, being torn apart. But life doesn't stay still forever. Slowly, without realizing it at first, I started changing. Not because I suddenly believed in myself, but because survival demanded it. I took small jobs. I struggled. I failed. I learned. And somewhere along the way, I started building something real. I didn't know it yet, but the very life Mrs. Carter said I'd never have was quietly taking shape. And years later, fate would bring us face to face again, becoming what she said I never could. Life didn't turn around overnight. There was no dramatic moment where I suddenly believed in myself. Growth came quietly, through exhaustion, necessity, and small wins no one applauded. I worked jobs I hated, long hours, low pay, being talked down to by people who barely knew my name. And strangely, it felt familiar, being underestimated, being invisible, being dismissed. But this time, something was different. I wasn't a child anymore. Every time someone doubted me, something stubborn woke up inside. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just worked harder. I learned skills on my own. I stayed late. I read. I practiced. I failed and failed again, but I didn't stop. Slowly, opportunities came. Not because I was brilliant, but because I was consistent. Years passed. I moved into a better role, then a better company. I built a reputation not flashy, not loud, but dependable. Someone people could trust. Someone who delivered. And with each small success, Mrs. Carter's voice became quieter. Nothing, she had said. Yet here I was, paying my own bills, supporting myself, making decisions, living a life she never imagined for me. Confidence didn't arrive as pride. It arrived as peace. Then one afternoon, about 10 years after I left that classroom, karma finally stirred. I was at a local cafe near my office. A normal day, coffee in hand, mind on deadlines. That's when I heard my name. I turned, and there she was, Mrs. Carter, older, tired, smaller somehow. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. Then it clicked. I saw it in her eyes, the quick scan of my face, searching her memory. "Oh," she said, surprised. "You were in my class." No apology, no warmth, just recognition. We exchanged a few polite words. She asked what I did now. When I told her, something shifted. Her smile tightened. Her eyes flickered envy, surprise, disbelief. She hadn't expected that answer. She had expected nothing. Before we parted, she said something that stayed with me. "I always knew you'd turn out fine." I smiled politely, but inside, something burned, because that was a lie. And karma wasn't finished yet. When the power shifted, that cafe encounter stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it reopened an old wound I thought had healed. "I always knew you'd turn out fine." The words replayed in my head for days. No, she didn't. She humiliated me. She labeled me. She broke something in a child and never looked back. A few weeks later, karma revealed itself, not dramatically, not publicly, but unmistakably. I ran into an old classmate at a networking event. We started reminiscing about school, teachers, the usual nostalgia. Then her name came up, Mrs. Carter. My friend hesitated, then said, "You know she doesn't teach anymore, right?" I didn't. Turns out, a few years after I graduated, complaints started surfacing. Not one or too many, parents, students, patterns of humiliation, favoritism, emotional cruelty masked as discipline. The school investigated. She wasn't fired outright. That would have been too clean. Instead, she was encouraged to retire early. Her authority quietly stripped away. Her classroom once her stage gone. The woman who thrived on power, on control, on making others feel small, lost the very thing that fed her ego. I later learned more through the grapevine. She struggled afterward. Teaching had been her identity. Without it, she drifted. Substitute jobs, short-term roles, nothing permanent, nothing powerful. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. The irony was almost painful. The student she declared nothing had built a life. The teacher who defined herself by authority lost it. But the real karma wasn't her downfall. It was what happened inside me. For the first time, I felt something close to closure. Not joy, not satisfaction, just clarity. She didn't shape my future. I did. What I never said to her. After learning what had happened to Mrs. Carter, I expected to feel victorious. I imagined some rush of justice, some sense of finally. But that's not what came. What came was reflection. I thought about that -1-year-old version of myself. The one standing in front of the class. Heart pounding, face burning, feeling small and powerless, I realized something painful but important. Mrs. Carter had walked away from that moment and probably never thought about it again. But I carried it for years. That wasn't just her cruelty. That was my silence. For a long time, I fantasized about confronting her, about telling her exactly what her words did to me, about watching realization hit her face that she had been wrong, that she had hurt someone deeply. In my head, I said everything. You don't remember humiliating me, but I remember every word. You called me nothing, and I believed you. You had power, and you abused it. But in reality, I never said any of it, because I didn't need to anymore. I realized that confronting her wouldn't heal the past. It wouldn't undo the damage. It wouldn't give that scared teenager his confidence back. What healed me was understanding this. Her cruelty came from her own emptiness. People who humiliate others do it because it makes them feel powerful, if only for a moment. She didn't destroy me because I was weak. She tried to lift herself because she was insecure. That realization changed everything. I stopped defining my growth as a response to her. I wasn't successful despite her. I was successful because I kept going when it would have been easier to give up. Karma didn't need me to act. Life handled it. Karma, healing, and the quiet victory. Years have passed now. Enough time that the pain doesn't sting the way it once did, but not so much that I've forgotten. Some memories don't fade. They change shape. Sometimes I think about how close I came to believing her completely. How easily one adult's words almost became the blueprint for my life. And that thought still scares me, because I know now how fragile confidence is in a child. Teachers don't just teach subjects. They teach children who they are allowed to become. Mrs. Carter never apologized. She probably never will. And strangely, that no longer matters, because I outgrew her. Karma didn't arrive with fireworks or public shame. It came quietly. It took her authority, her voice, her audience. It took the one thing she used to define herself, and it gave me something far more valuable in return: perspective. I don't measure my success by how far I climbed or how much I earned. I measure it by this: I am no longer afraid of being seen. I no longer hear her voice when I fail. I no longer believe that I am nothing. That 15-year-old kid didn't need revenge. He needed time. He needed distance. He needed proof that one person's cruelty doesn't get to decide a lifetime. If there's one reason I'm telling this story, it's this. If a teacher, a parent, a boss, or anyone in authority ever made you feel small, remember this. Their words say more about them than they ever will about you. Karma doesn't always punish loudly. Sometimes it simply lets people become irrelevant. And sometimes, the greatest victory is living well, healing fully, and never becoming like the person who tried to break you. That's the karma that lasts. The end.